While patch 6.1 wasn't great, there were two main highlights from it, which are the buffs to Inkstorm and Wave Breaker. These are basically brand new effects, so I want to take some extra time to talk about them both design and balance-wise, to see what I think about them and what weapons might be seeing use because of them. If this breakdown helps you, consider subscribing, and let's get right into it, starting with Wave Breaker. Well, this special being a rework of Echolocator is clearly shown more. This effect happens when you throw the wave, having a unique sound effect that resembles Splatoon 1 Echolocator. Take a listen. The radius of this point sensor effect is about 2/3 or 66% the radius of the usual Wave Breaker waves, which is 20 units. So it's still decently large. However, compared to the waves, it does go down a little bit notably, which gives it some unique locations you can throw it in. Basically, think of this thing like a super point sensor with less throwing range. Now, the big downside to this ability is compared to the waves from Wave Breaker, they do no damage and only last 1.5 seconds long instead of 7.
Hi, this is a note from the editor. While I was reviewing gameplay to figure out the exact amount of time Wave's new initial pulse marks targets for, I realized that the initial pulse works in a way unique to it from the regular waves. When Wave Breaker marks targets with its damage-dealing pulses, it marks each target for a flat 8 seconds, starting from the frame the target is hit. This means that a target that was hugging Wave Breaker when they were hit with a damage-dealing pulse will start and finish their 8-second timer earlier than someone who is hit on the farther end of the wave's reach. The initial locating pulse Wave Breaker gained as a 6.1.0 marks its targets in the same sequential order near to far, just a lot faster. However, it is unique in that, unlike the normal waves, all targets lose their marks at the same time, regardless of the order in which they were targeted. This was likely done in order to put the effect more in line with something like Inkmine, where all the marks are given and lost in unison. It's an interesting discrepancy that I thought was worth its own explanation. Now back to Chara's commentary.
While it's incredibly short, the main utility of this buff is to gain information a lot faster. For example, let's say I'm using Range Blaster on museum zones, and I want to round this right corner, but I'm unsure about sharking locations. This is a weapon that doesn't have any way to find people hiding very easily, and with old Wave Breaker, what you do is you'd throw it, wait about 3 seconds for the wave to come out, round the corner to scan the area, and then move. But in this patch, I just throw the Wave Breaker and move instantly, and I can know the area close to the corner I'm in is completely clear. That time save is the biggest part of this buff, and it can apply to other weapons as well. For example, E-Leader on Hagglefish Tent can throw Wave Breaker down into the zone, and the effect will check for sharks underneath the tent. And that could also potentially cover immediate flanks near that area. Maybe a frontline dropped bottom right and is hiding there, and even though they got located for a little bit and it'll wear off instead of getting hit by the waves, you as a charger player can now know to scan that area. Even if the flanker doesn't have to move away, they no longer have the advantage of stealth against a long-range charger. Even stuff like Custom Junior can use this immediate location to find out where they should be throwing their torpedo immediately. All of these weapons benefit more from this time save. Now, not every wave weapon gets a massive benefit from this, but these are good examples that showcase it. Even if it's not huge, it's still at least an extra effect that has no real downside. Design-wise, I think it's pretty neat as well. The limited throwing range and tracking time ensures that it still feels fair, despite locating people a lot more easily than the waves themselves, and I think it gives it better synergy with most of the weapons they put it on. Wave Breaker needed a bit more to it, and this works well, and it also still has all the risk of throwing wave into a more exposed area and being able to be shredded if you're going for that instant location. Now, how much better is Wave? Honestly, not that much. It's definitely a step up, but it's not a whole lot. While the location effect has uses in terms of this speed, it doesn't change the special too much. I think some other buffs, like a bit more HP on the Wave Breaker itself, so stuff like Splatana's or E-Leader doesn't break it as easily, or a slightly larger wave so they're a bit more difficult to jump over, would be good changes. To me, this buff means the weapons with wave that are already solid, stuff like Range Blaster, E-Leader, maybe Vanilla Dually Squelcher mainly, will care a lot about this, but I don't think you're gonna see weaker Wave Breaker weapons like Custom Junior or Paintbrush suddenly start getting picked. So I don't think it will impact weapon diversity too much, but it's still a solid change. Let's move over to Inkstorm. Storm, by contrast, was already pretty decent. It's 8 seconds of solid paint and displacement that doesn't take up a player slot, which made it really easy to work into comps. It just lacked any real power stat, which it still doesn't have, but it has some new utility. The special's new effect is that your healing is the same in squid form even when you're understanding. This mainly benefits weapons that don't want to go back into squid form when fighting, such as splatlings, brushes while they're rolling, or brellas while they're shielding. Like FLC mentioned on Twitter earlier, I think shooters actually benefit the least from this change, since they have the greatest freedom of movement to easily go back into squid form. Even a class that's very similar like dualies has a lot larger of a period where it might be out of ink, especially for something like Tetra. However, of course, even stuff like shooters benefit a little bit, particularly when trying to paint and stay alive for longer range or more mobile paint shooters, think Jet or Nova painting a zone. However, I think this buff is a lot smaller than it seems, and this goes into the mechanics of how it works, because this is like normal healing, which means for it to start applying, you can't take damage for more than 1 second, which includes even stepping into a bit of enemy ink. Any further damage you take can interrupt the healing process. This means in a large team fight with paint and ink and specials flying everywhere, it's much more likely you're going to take damage and actually have to move behind some form of cover. However, there's also a much larger downside to this. For the storm to be on your team, it means it's not going to be used as a displacement tool as much. For example, let's go back to Museum. Normally, you would throw the storm in the zone, and it would displace people in the zone, moving toward the enemy plat to hit some backline players there. Now though, you may throw the storm closer to your side of the zone, moving toward the right side, where your team is going to push so that you can stand in the zone for a lot longer, which means it's no longer going to be hitting enemies on plat, but you can stay in it for much more of the full duration. Design-wise though, I think it's cool to have this dilemma. It's healthy that you can't have both of these at the same time, and forcing people to pick between it is good. This special's new best utility for this healing effect to me though, is being used alongside the objective or against specials. So for example, it's great against Crab, Indirect Fire, or Inkjet, where you're much more likely to be able to heal if they miss just one shot. Or for an objective example, using it ahead of where the Rainmaker wants to go, or on the tower to help protect the people using the objective from being able to die as fast. And considering Splatoon 3 did remove chainable HP or armor specials, which is a good change, it's nice to see a healthier replacement for sustain, which I think this game could use. I think another benefit of Storm is that displacement tools are the most important specials that you're going to run in your comp. You need a lot of ways to get in, especially on the maps we have, and Storm can be used as one, even if it's not as strong as something like a Zuka or a Jetpack. If your Crab guy dies on retake, you can use the Inkstorm as an entry tool, whereas if your entry guys don't die and actually use their specials, you can use the Storm more supportively. So I think it's a lot easier for the special itself to fit in comps. However, like with Wave Breaker, I don't see this being enough to boost weaker Storm weapons like Explosher or Big Swig. This will mostly benefit already solid Inkstorm weapons. What come to mind for me are the Nautilus, Custom Jet Squelcher, and Pencil 5B. Though I could potentially see Blob on Rainmaker and zones, and maybe even Octobrush on a few maps. However, you might have noticed that most of these main weapons are backlines. In fact, 4 of the main weapons with Storm are backlines, which gets into the main issue here for me, a lack of kits. This is a problem for the game as a whole, but it really shows with Rain. The majority of the weapons you would want with Storm are things that are directly competing with Pencil right now, the main cooler option in the game, with the only real exception that's easier to fit in comps being the Nautilus, which is a shame to me because I think the special seems really valuable and easy to fit in, but the poor quantity of kits really just makes it difficult here, and more combinations would have helped a lot. Still, if we get more kits later, or maybe Pencil becomes less of a necessity and other cooler weapons become better when we decide to balance the weapon, I could see Inkstorm being used a lot more. I don't know if I would see it as an actual top tier special, but it's pretty close to that, and I think it's something that we should be seeing a lot more over time. So in conclusion, I really liked how they did these special changes. I was a bit worried that these effects might be implemented in an unhealthy way, especially Inkstorm's healing, but they did a really good job with it. To me, this is a big benefit of the patch, and I do hope, if nothing else, we get more changes like this in future patches. Maybe some of these for main weapons too would be cool. But for now, that's about everything I have to say. Thanks so much for watching, and let me know what you think about these specials in the comments below, and I will see you all next time.